Hello, everyone. This is Curt and welcome to another edition of Fire Law Roundup. This one for November 7th of 2022. We're actually recording this on the 6th, and that's because I'm in Boise. Excuse me. I'm in Boise, so if you notice a little bit of a difference in the quality of the material, the video, that's the excuse. So Brad, welcome, and take us away. We got, I don't know, did you see the last one, the Kansas City one? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, let's start in Kansas City, because I think this is a great, I think this is great for people. Look, we never try to scare people into worrying about liability from volunteering or serving for pay in the fire emergency services. But if you're going to recklessly drive, then maybe you should be worried. This is going to raise some really interesting issues we'll talk about, but the facts are very simple. A Kansas City firefighter was involved in a crash. He killed 3 people. This is just last December. This is not a long time ago. He was driving an engine. It ran a red light, collided with an SUV, struck several parked cars, came to rest in a building, destroyed the building, but the passengers in the SUV were killed, as well as a pedestrian. So this was a lot of bad outcomes, a lot of death, unfortunately, and even down to the building, which again collapsed and was destroyed. So he was sued personally, which doesn't always happen, because normally you'll sue the employee and the employer, but you're really focusing on the employer. Nonetheless, you still almost always have to prove the employee was liable. Here, he submitted to an interesting process. I don't want to get too much off topic, but he appeared without representation and appeared in front of an arbitrator.
Well, I want to get back to that in a bit, but go ahead, because I've got
and I'm shocked at that. Very, very unique, but nonetheless, and crazy. I can't believe the city allowed him to, but nonetheless, so he appeared. There was an award. It was affirmed, and he's ordered to pay $32 million. Now, obviously, he doesn't have it, but his employer certainly does. And I think the question now is going to be, is the employer liable for his acts? The answer sure should be yes. But under an immunity statute, I believe, I'm taking a little guess from what I've read, but they have to prove he was reckless, which is probably not going to be too difficult, but you never know. And the question is whether his employer knew he was had a history, if he had a history of reckless driving, and one was reckless. So there's a lot to take away from this, Curt, right? And we can start at any point of, I always get asked, should firefighters have their own insurance to insure them while driving? If you got a car, you have insurance in most states anyway. I don't know who would ever have $32 million worth of insurance. But certainly have some insurance if you can be personally liable. But, to me, and I'll turn this over to you, to me, this is kind of a one-off where the driver, not the employer, at first blush is liable.
Yeah, well, let's a couple of things I want to discuss, and you brought up the insurance thing. I can't tell you how many people have said, should we get insurance? They ask me, should we get insurance, or we ought to have insurance? You can't get the insurance, so forget it. You can't buy, you can't get the insurance. I've searched, I've asked. I can't tell you. And I think you and I went out to dinner with someone from VFIS trying to talk to him about this. But bottom line is, you just can't get it. The department can get it, but trying to get it individually is just and it's certainly, if anybody is what I typically, when I ask this question, people say, oh yeah, I know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who got the insurance. But when I ask them, do you have the name of an agent that will, or a company that will provide this? that's where the buck ends. So, but if anybody certainly knows of an insurer that provides this type of coverage, whether apparatus or officer liability or whatever, not for the department. I know there's agencies out there that provide the insurance for the department, but that an individual can purchase a policy, that's not going to happen. But I think the strategy here is pretty interesting. I think this would be more interesting for the lawyers that listen as opposed to the firefighters, but I think the firefighters might pick something up here. Very often when you're representing the families here, the deceased families, you've got to make a decision to either include the driver as a defendant or not. And there's a strategic issue there. Like sometimes you say, we're more likely to get cooperation from the driver if we don't name them. And I know that happens sometimes in sexual harassment cases as well. Some of the backroom discussions between the attorneys and the client is, let's not name certain parties, because if we name them, the shields are going to go up, the radar, and they're not going to cooperate. Whereas if we don't name them, hopefully we'll get a little bit more cooperation. So that's sort of one strategic issue. The other strategic issue is one I've had to deal with a number of times, because you have an insurance company for a municipality. It could be a municipal insurance trust, could be a private insurer, but they play a little bit of a game where they're looking at their liability and they're saying, you know what, we're going to say that this firefighter went beyond what they're allowed to do. They went outside the scope of their employment, and therefore we're not going to cover them. And they make a strategic decision that by not doing that, they're going to be able to save themselves some money. And they're going to
Which is hard to do when you're driving to a fire call in a fire truck. Clearly that's
in the city's fire truck. And I understand. Okay. But here's the thing. And again, I don't want to get into the details of that. I haven't had an apparatus case, but I've had a number of other cases where firefighters, clients of mine, have been sued. The insurance company or the city has said, you're on your own. We're not going to provide you with legal counsel. And here's my move. Oh, yeah? Well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to roll over.
Right.
And we're going to
you
cooperate.
were aware I was a bad employee, and you were aware I was doing stuff, and you didn't train me to be a good employee. And we're going to cooperate
with the plaintiffs.
Yep.
Okay. And they're going to let us off for $5, and we're going to dump tailboard. Okay. Right. Or you can provide the insurance. It's up to you. So I think there's a lot of like a chess match going on that it escapes the news media, because the news media, it's too involved to get into in the news media. But there are some chess matches going on behind the scenes here. Number one, are you going to name someone like the driver? And number two, what happens when you have an insurance company or a city here that's going to turn around and say, yeah, we're not going to provide you with an attorney. Now, I represent people who I've represented for years in a situation like this where they can't get another attorney. Attorney wants 20 grand, 30 grand, 40 grand. They're longtime clients of mine. I said, all right, I will do it. But here's what we're going to do. Our game plan is going to be to get the insurance company to see the wisdom of defending you. And that's the game plan right there. And we usually are successful. I have never not been successful. Let me put it that way. So, but I wonder if Kansas City, the folks who were making that decision there may have maybe made a little blunder now, because it looks like in the arbitration, the kid just said, yeah, I did it. And I don't have, I got maybe 20,000 in the bank, but I'll go file bankruptcy. There's nothing I can do. And now I'll help you chase we'll help you chase the city. So.
Yeah, there's got to be something we didn't know, because nobody in their right mind would let this person go alone, right? It's just crazy to me, but it happened. It's a very interesting process. I don't know that exists in many other states, but nonetheless, they're going to pay a lot of money.
Yeah, the arbitration process is interesting, and what it looks like. I'm not a Missouri attorney, but what it sounds like is that as a defendant, you have the option, or if the parties are in agreement, they can arbitrate it. And then, you're stuck with the arbitrator's ruling. And in this case, the arbitrator found that the driver was liable for $32 million. So,
and look, if people are listening to this saying, oh my God, I'm afraid I'm going to lose everything in my life that I've ever saved because I had an accident, then don't drive recklessly, right? Pay attention to speed, pay attention to traffic conditions, stop at all controlled intersections. Hopefully that's your policy. Don't drive in a manner that will produce this result. And yes, there are some times where we need to drive faster in dangerous conditions, but that doesn't mean you drive dangerously in those conditions. So, drive like yours and everybody else's life depends on it. Nobody dead has ever saved anybody on scene. Right.
and
So
I think about how I drive now and how I used to drive. And, certainly there's a little bit of wisdom that comes with age. But at any rate, we try to help the younger folks understand the consequences. And, sometimes a $32 million verdict isn't the worst thing that comes out of a case like this. We've seen firefighters charged with manslaughter. We've seen firefighters convicted of manslaughter.
we've seen firefighters take their own lives, not being able to live with what happened.
Right, and that as well. But I still think you're going to have to live with the consequences of it. And it's a lot harder to live with the consequences from inside a prison. I recall shortly after I got on Providence, one of the firefighters, most of the senior firefighters were on ladder companies, and he pulled me aside. Engine goes first, ladder goes second. He was driving the ladder, and he said, you're going down that street fairly quick. If a kid runs out, there's no amount of I'm sorry afterwards that's going to change a thing.
Good advice.
I'm sorries are cheap. There's no amount of I'm sorries. You can't undo something like that. And I to this day, I remember the conversation, remember where we were when we had the conversation. He did it in a really professional way. And it wasn't an officer, it was a firefighter to firefighter, and there's no amount of I'm sorries that's going to change it. So,
right. So maybe this will scare a little sense into some people, right? At least, we'll hopefully look at this and tell people, well, here's another reason for you to drive, like everyone's life depends on it.
yeah.
Okay, let's go it's still the same mentality, but I don't know what people were thinking here. Let's go to Denver. Here, two Denver firefighters. This is just horrible. I could see it. I can understand why it happens, but this is a bad idea. So in June of 22, again, this is pretty recent, in Denver, two firefighters responded on a welfare check. There's some discrepancy on what actually happened, but they went into a woman, 57-year-old woman. They claimed that she was decomposing, that there was signs of lividity, that she was leaking fluids. So as a result, they did not assess the woman for breathing or a pulse, but instead contacted med control for a death pronouncement. Now, if you stop there, I don't have a huge problem with it, right? If you've got obvious signs and you relay exactly what you did and did not do to the physician, so be it. However, they allegedly assured medical control that they had personally checked the patient despite not having done so. And so med control said, okay, fine. Based on all of that, including the fact that you said there's no pulse, you can pronounce. And as you can imagine, unfortunately, later the police go back to the residence and observe the woman moving. And then she was transported to the hospital. So there's going to be a couple of things that will and won't happen. So first, what has happened is the firefighter has been demoted, suspended without pay, prohibited from being suspended for 5 years, faces terminations, right? And then the other one was suspended as well for 240 hours, 10 shifts. But you might be saying, well, is there going to be a lawsuit? Probably not, because probably the chance of having transported that woman and then her being savable was probably zero. And so you probably won't see a lawsuit about this. Although I could think of some pain and suffering lawsuits, right? She was in pain, and had they transported her, she would have been given morphine and comforted while she passed away. I could see some value in that.
I think she survived. I'm pretty sure she survived.
Oh, I thought she died.
No, I'm pretty sure she survived, unless I'm mistaken, unless I misread it. But I think you're raising a really good point here in terms of, the juries can't just award damages just because somebody was negligent or someone was careless or lied. You have to be able to point to some sort of either physical pain or emotional distress or something. And the question is, by her being there for another 20 minutes, half hour, would there have been any change in what ended up happening? Whether she passed away, and again, I think she survived. And I think it's interesting, it was her mother that made the call. It was a check on the well-being, and she had recently had surgery, and they hadn't heard from her. So that was what prompted the call. So, again, interesting, insight into what leads to damages. And I think you're absolutely right. If there is a suit, there may be a suit. There's not going to be big damages here.
No, and pain and suffering to the extent they could show she was conscious and could have pain. Hard to imagine. In any event, don't do stuff like this, right? Yeah. Don't guess. You have a protocol, follow your protocol. And look, had you followed the protocol, they would have found the pulse. So transport her. But don't guess, follow the protocol, and sure as heck, don't lie. I'm surprised that they weren't terminated carte blanche, but I would have fired them on the spot. I get what they did.
Yeah, I think a lot of departments did, and whether it was one-time error in judgment, or whether it was a pattern of this kind of behavior, I think that kind of goes into that decision to terminate. Certainly, where it's a pattern with a certain individual that keeps doing this, it's one thing. Where somebody made a bad choice on a given day, I don't know. I guess every department's going to handle that a little bit differently.
And they got caught, right? They got caught. Probably making an understandable judgment call, lividity, leaking fluids, etc. But you were wrong.
Well,
follow the protocol.
There's another factual dispute, and again, this can get into the truth or falsity. But reportedly, the cops got there first, and they said, according to the firefighters, they said, "Don't bother going in," and the firefighters said, "Thank you for telling us. We won't go in." And that's another part. Now that the cops deny that, the cops say, no, that's not what happened. So, some of these cases, when you first get on the scene and there's that smell, that horrible smell, and many times the police don't want us going in, or they want us to go in just enough to say the person's dead. And because if they're like, think about the OJ scene or some of the other homicide scenes, the more people who go in there, the greater the risk of screwing up the evidence. So I understand some police refer to us as the evidence destruction team when we get there. So but at any rate, I think there's competing concerns here, but very unclear about exactly who said what when they first got there. And but you don't lie to the doctor and say, yeah, we checked, we assessed, and when you didn't. So
right. Okay, let's we're gonna come to New York. We're gonna go very close to me in Watertown, New York. I just gonna give a heads up. I am going to be very light with this issue. I know the players, I know the issue. I've gone through the academy, I teach at the academy, I can issue state fire courses, and I've served with some of these instructors. So I'm going to be very light on this. This is a continuing saga. I'll give a little background. This was a Watertown, which is a good sized department, not huge, but a good sized department. They send their recruits to the New York State Fire Academy in Montour Falls. And the Fire Academy is a very, very good fire academy. I know a ton of the instructors. I've taken a lot of classes with the instructors. I've taken the exact class that was subject of this issue from some of the instructors. And I'm familiar with the teaching techniques. And so the recruit was going through the maze. This is all allegedly. Let me just preface this. And was allegedly having trouble breathing. And I don't think it's in this article, but the prior articles have said that the firefighter said that, listen, I can't breathe. And they turned to him and said, well, if you're talking, you're breathing. And there's some dispute about that, although I got to tell you, I've heard that personally said. But it's never said in a hazing or bullying sort of way. It's, hey, you're okay. If you're talking, you're breathing, you're okay. Now, that said, tons of people panic in this maze. The maze at the Fire Academy is a very tough maze right from the beginning. But in any event, the firefighter died. And look, in Montour Falls, I've had the need to be part of an ambulance crew where a bunch of us were rappelling, and we got attacked by a lot of bees. And there was no ambulance available. The ambulance is far away. So in fact, they started CPR and they transported the patient on a bus because the ambulance was too far away. In any event, the person died, and there's a lot of allegations. There was an attempted lawsuit, there's investigations, but this one is about whether the grand jury would indict whether there's any crime that was committed, and the grand jury says there's no crime. Now, the family and the fire chief of the city of Watertown have been very much trying to push for some accountability on the part of the instructors and the state fire academy. They've had the state OSHA, which is PASH, Public Employee Safety and Health, but we call it state OSHA. They've had state OSHA there. They didn't cite the fire academy. The attorney general's looked into it. The attorney general didn't cite the fire academy. And so the family is basically saying that, look, everybody's covering it up. And the attorney general works for states covering it up. The PASH/OSHA works for the state covering it up. So they're basically saying that everybody's covering it up. So I don't want to get into too much. I sympathize with this. They go on, though. This statement from the family gets a little more personal. My law office is in the town of DeWitt, right across the street from the firehouse. I was a member of the DeWitt Fire Department way back in the 80s before I moved on. But I'm in DeWitt now. So let me just carefully say, one of the accusations, they said, well, a town of DeWitt firefighter, and it's a DeWitt Fire District firefighter, was injured when he fell from a roof ladder that was being allegedly used improperly, they say. And they said the academy, just like theirs, said it was a one-time error, there's no issue. And yet they've pulled out other pictures that say, see, they've done this before. So all I'm going to say is, I know the instructors. I've been taught by the instructors. I've taught with the instructors. I've gone through this course. I've gone through the instructor portion of this course as well. It is rigorous. It is difficult. I don't think I could do it now at 54. I did it around age 40. That was hard enough. And it's taxing on you. And I could see how people have issues. But I got to tell you, when I did it, which was before this, they cheer you on. They're not yelling at you. They're not bullying you. They're not hazing you. I have very good personal friends who teach at the academy. And we stopped bullying, hazing, and teaching like that, and that harassing, you're a little kid, walk like a man, walk like a woman type. They haven't done that for a decade or more at the fire academy. I've gone through 14 different at least 14, maybe 20 different courses at the academy. And I've never been talked to like that by any instructor, including these instructors. But that said, I wasn't there. I'm not trying to put my bias into it, because I am biased on behalf of the state, but I definitely sympathize, that something happened. And, being, whether there's something that could have saved the individual or prevented this is a different question than whether they were intentionally harassing, bullying the person, whether there's criminal conduct, whether it was merely, something that happened that's very unfortunate. But this is, I think, almost or the final attempt by the family, because I don't think there's anybody left to investigate this case. And look, I don't personally think the state is covering this up. I've participated in other injury investigations with them, and they've been forthcoming. And look, again, up till a little while, a couple months ago, I taught at the fire academy. So I'm obviously biased. I'm not employed by the state, but I'm obviously biased. So just because of my personal experience, but this is probably not the last we'll hear from this, but they've run out. I can't think of anywhere else to go on this matter or other, that they haven't gone. They've done credit to trying to get justice, but justice in this case may be that nobody did anything that deserves civil or criminal damages.
It's not the first claim of this nature. And there was one, I don't want to identify even the state, but it was a high profile fatality. And when you talk to the family, I had the opportunity to talk to the family. I got one side of a story. When I talked to the instructors, and I was fortunate to be able to talk, off the record with the instructors, I got an entirely different story. And, I guess unless you put both of them in the courtroom together with impartial witnesses, you never get the full story. But it was pretty clear that each side had ramped up their version of the events, and where the truth lies in a lot of this is very, very difficult. And I don't know of a better system than what we have. We don't have a great system for getting
Video.
to the truth. To a jury. Yeah, when you have video, that's another thing. But I think there's still are lessons. I think more lessons for the fire academies out there than for the individual firefighters. But from the academy's perspective, it's the importance of being able to investigate allegations when someone comes to you with an allegation that an officer or an instructor spoke inappropriately or did something, that we do an investigation, not targeting that officer. You're not trying to get that officer. You're trying to figure out, is there any credibility? And then if there is, then what sort of coaching do we need to prevent it? But that we are able to show, whether it's to the state, whether it's to the families, that we are running a good program, that here are allegations in the past. These are the ones that have been dealt with. These are the ones that have been cleared. And that we're running a tight ship, as opposed to we've been in business for 50 years as a fire academy and we've never done anything wrong, and we do things right, but you can't really show that you've ever actually done an investigation. So I think again, how I am. I'm big on, if there's allegations, we investigate, and when we clear people, we clear them, and if not, then we've got to show what we did to try to rectify it. So,
right. And look, I'm going to end this kind of segment of that story with one very brief note, that look, I've seen people freak out in mazes. I've seen people panic in mazes. We've all seen it. They rip their masks off, and the instructors try to encourage you to go. Come on, you could do it. You could do it. Keep going. We're pushing you beyond your own fears. But my department had a member of the Special Forces join us. He was the real deal, Special Forces, and he went down as a paid recruit to the fire academy, and he quit after the maze. He says, I've done some hard things as Special Forces, he said, but that maze was like nothing I've ever done. So it is, look, you're in a box, you're going up, you're going left, you're going right. You could panic. I could see how people could panic. I happen to love the maze because they're not going to let anything bad happen to you. You're just in a box, right? The walls aren't closing. This isn't Indiana Jones, but I get it. So this is, the maze is tough right from the beginning. That academy maze is tough. You go up a ramp and you're exhausted when you finally get up there. So I get it. They work you, and you're up at the academy. You're up at 6 a.m. running and doing PT. You come out in great shape, but it's hard. So I'm not. I wasn't there. I'm just. I'm biased. I sympathize with everybody, but I also sympathize with the instructors. They got to live with this, as we just said before. So
yeah.
Okay, let's switch to one who also in my area, an hour away, who I don't sympathize with. The police, who clearly, frankly, I would sue, and should be sued. I'm sure there's going to be a suit, but we've all seen this video. If you haven't seen the video, an EMT, a female EMT, brings a patient in. She, I think, scratches a cop car or accidentally hits a cop car. Who, I don't know why he was parked in the ambulance bay anyway, but nonetheless, the cop got all pissed off. And
he's a cop.
Yeah, I know. I know. Your brother's a cop, right? What can you say?
My brother, my nephew, my son.
I know.
It's one in every generation in my family.
But the cop gets pissed off. The EMT was going to bring the patient in. How dare her? And the cop goes in, as we see on the video. Like we said, video, no question what happens here. I think the patient was still on the stretcher, and the cop charges in and arrests her. What I didn't know, because it wasn't on the video, but it's reported here, is that she is then, when she's taken out, placed in the car and held for about 20 minutes, handcuffed in the back of the police car, and then released without being charged. You're going to pay for those 20 minutes. I'm just... Right. I mean, I'm waiting for the next one lawsuit filed. There had to have been already, obviously, a notice of claim filed, because it has to be filed. Well, it's not negligence, it's intent. So I guess, but they got a year to sue this thing. So we're going to see something coming out. But in any event, the officer has been disciplined, and appropriately. And here's kind of the opposite side to the state, where people are saying, well, you didn't investigate. Here they investigated and they found a violation. Yeah. Right. And they don't want to, but they sure they don't want to find a violation, right? But you didn't get what you would have expected to get. And the Rochester Police Department has got a good reputation, and here good reputation mostly. There was a bad incident all over the national news a little bit ago, but they are a pretty honest department as reputation goes, and they investigated and cited themselves, right? Basically, they found their employee violated at least one rule and regulation. So they'll be disciplined, but kudos to the Rochester Police Department for not covering it up, because that would be worse.
Well, it is, and I think there's a lesson there too. I mean, and I think that's what police departments are doing, and I think the consequences, when the police are aware that they've got someone that they've hired that has this kind of, he's susceptible to contempt a cop, and he engages in this kind of behavior, he may do it again in a different context, and it could end up a lot worse than just an EMT in the back of a police car. It could be much worse. It's the kind of person who's going to get them into a lot of trouble. So I think police departments are looking for those types of problems and addressing them appropriately as a risk management tool. On the fire side, a lot of times we're too busy trying to cover it up and circle the wagons and coming up with excuses why we don't want to have to investigate ourselves. But I think we don't necessarily have to fire somebody, but we've got to recognize, wait a minute, we've got a problem behavior, let's fix the behavior. And I really think that we've got to get better at that. The police are so much better than they used to be 30 years ago, but we still can learn a lot from them by that approach of doing the investigation, not trying to get somebody, but trying to figure out what's going on, and then saying, you know what, we've got a problem here. This is how we're going to have to get it fixed, but the behavior's got to stop.
And look, 2 points to that. One is, this was the most obvious time where the police are going to find something wrong. It's on video, right? It's on video. And it was viral all over video. And every first response agency was going to, was watching this. The other part is Monroe Ambulance is a very politically connected ambulance company in Rochester and Monroe County. And their boss, I can guarantee, was not going to allow this to go unpunished. But so that's the first part, right? They didn't really have a choice. But the good news is, to your point on fire departments, if you have the chance to take action against yourself, you are buying yourself a defense in the future. And what you're buying yourself a defense from is the allegation that you have a long history of allowing this. It's in law, we call this Monell, but that the municipality has an unwritten policy of allowing this type of conduct, and that you do nothing about it ever. And if they can prove that, they can allege another constitutional violation. And when you have this opportunity to say, listen, just like here, if in the future we knew about something, we would have reacted the same way. So our only policy that we have is, if you do something and we catch you, we're going to punish you. So this buys you a free defense. I'm hoping what I said makes sense to everyone, but just to sum up again, if you have the chance to prove yourself wrong when you're obviously going to lose, do so, because it will help you in the future when somebody accuses you of covering something up.
Right. And we may find out about something soon enough where we can fix it with a reprimand. If this same officer goes out and shoots somebody or does something much worse a year from now, 6 months from now, whenever, you're not, you didn't do him any favors by covering it up. So let's find out about it. If it's fixable, let's get a reprimand, maybe a brief suspension, whatever we need to do to get the person back on the straight and narrow, but don't ignore it, because you ignore it, it's going to come back.
Yeah. And it's way cheaper and way less time to just admit, if it's true, right? Admit what you found and fix it, than it is to try to cover it up, because, text messages, emails, videos, it's tough to cover anything up these days.
Not like the good old days, right?
Yeah, exactly. You just throw them in Lake Mead and hope they don't show up 40 years later in a barrel. Right. Okay, let's stay in New York. Man, this is New York Day. I feel like LA.
Three of them, yeah.
Yeah, so. It's I'm sorry, New York. I love you, but in any event, New York is just some of these are my clients, or I know them well. But 78 municipalities and plus fire districts in New York State, mostly down on Long Island, but they are suing a consulting firm. The consulting firm has already lost, right? I mean, they lost in other suits for big money, hundreds of millions, I think, for pushing opioids. And what they allege here, which I think is what they've been awarded in others, is that this consulting company, McKinsey, had been engaging in deceptive trade practices, false advertising, negligent misrepresentation, fraud, unjust enrichment, blah, 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 a bunch of things, basically pushing opioids like they have no issues. And so the suit claims that this consulting company helped the pharmaceutical company who already pled guilty. The pharmaceutical company already pled guilty to misleading regulators, doctors, the public, right, about how addictive Oxy is. And, we know that leads to heroin once you no longer can get and afford the Oxy, which is expensive. Heroin's cheap, $4 a use or whatever. But in any event, and Purdue already entered into a corporate integrity agreement where they would stop this, but yet the consulting firm is helping them allegedly still push the same false claims and not openly saying, yeah, this stuff is bad and addictive. So this is follows a prior lawsuit where 47 states sued McKinsey. Those were settled. Oh, here you have the number, $573 million back in 21. So this is just more. I can't believe they're still in business. How they have that much money, have not declared bankruptcy, was beyond me. I was shocked they're still around.
I think that they're following the blueprint that was developed for the tobacco industry, and they're following it up, and pretty much they've gotten just about everything they can out of the pharmaceuticals on the opioid, and now they're going after this consulting firm that helped them market and target certain providers, doctors and hospitals and pharmacies. And so there was some allegation that the way that they did it, the specifics of how they did it violated, in this case, the RICO Act, the racketeering influence corrupt organizations.
Bringing criminal charges, yeah.
So we'll see how it goes, but it's just another avenue now. We've covered a lot of the opioid, at least in my blog, we've covered quite a few of the opioid suits. A lot of communities have been able to recover some of the damages. And so now I guess they found another deep pocket to go after.
Yeah. So Curt, I'm asking, get out of my state.
Stop picking on
back
your
to
state.
LA, who everybody sues.
I haven't done this in a while. The last time I did it, the most litigious fire service state was, drum roll, was Pennsylvania, followed by New York. Yeah, I know it.
No, I would have said LA. Everyone sues LA. I mean, come on.
Well, I haven't done it in a while. LA was certainly in the top 5. Not LA, you mean California was
California, right? City of Los Angeles.
But yeah, so I'll do that again when in my spare time. One of these days, I'll run the states. I wish I used to have a really good database called Paradox, and I could come up with results really quickly. The one I'm using now, I know there's folks out there that know FileMaker, so they're probably saying, it's FileMaker is even easier than Paradox. But at any rate, I should be able to run that. It'd probably take me 20 minutes or so to do it. But I'll come up with the top litigation states. So, but don't worry, New York is there. So,
I'm thankful it is. Trust me.
All right, and I think that's gonna do it. We'll be back at the regular time, hopefully next week. For our next edition of Fire Law Roundup. But thank you, everyone. Please subscribe. We're continuing to increase the subscribers, but it'd be great if we could get it up to 1,000. That way, YouTube is going to help us once we get to 1,000 in terms of getting our name out there. But we really appreciate any support. Likes and shares are also appreciated.